And now, Legal Perspective with Nick Clekis.
Rideshare apps have made traveling much more convenient, but since 2011, they've also been linked to a 3% rise in traffic fatalities. And when accidents happen, the fine print can leave both passengers and drivers in the rear view. Here to help us navigate the legal twists and turns is Nick Clekis, owner of Clekis Law Firm. Nick, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Can you break down how rideshare insurance works?
Yeah, so the way it works is that if, let's say you're an Uber or Lyft driver, they call them in the statute TNCs for Transportation Network Community, but the way that the insurance works is that if, let's say you're sitting waiting to get a ride, as soon as you get that ride confirmed and you're heading to pick that person up, the TNC insurance kicks in.
Okay.
And same with once the person gets in the car, until the ride is over, that insurance covers them.
And now what if a passenger has called the car and is waiting and they get hit or something terrible happens? Does Uber or Lyft have any control over that or any hand in that?
Not until they enter the vehicle.
Okay. And what is the amount of coverage?
$1 million.
Okay. And does it differ depending on if I call, a regular car or if I call, an SUV, a Cadillac? Does it differ at all?
I don't think so. I think once the coverage is engaged, it's the $1 million coverage.
Okay. And now, situationally, I'm sure many of us have done it. I'm guilty as well. You're in an Uber and you're like, hey, can I slide you a 20, pull over to the gas station or whatever. So does the coverage change in a situation like that where maybe he, takes a turn and takes me to the gas station off of the app? What does that do?
Yeah, so frolic and detour. So if, let's say you're with a group of girls and the destination is, a hotel, and then you say, hey, can you just take me 2 blocks to my house? That 2 blocks is not going to be covered because you're not going through the app. The coverage ends at that stop. And so you think you're getting a deal by giving them $20 to go somewhere else, but that $1 million is gone, and you get struck by another vehicle or this guy hits a telephone pole, and there's no coverage.
So even if you're an Uber driver, but we're pals, so I slide you a 20, pay you under the table, even though you are an Uber driver, if it's not through the app, no coverage.
Correct, it doesn't trigger.
Okay. And what if an Uber is hit by an uninsured driver?
So that time that we did this segment on insurance, you remember in South Carolina, like regular car insurance, if you have a policy, it automatically comes with uninsured motorist coverage. Same thing with the Lyft, the TNC, Uber stuff. If they've got $1 million, they have the uninsured. So if you're struck by a vehicle that doesn't have coverage, this coverage will kick in.
Okay.
Not to be confused with underinsured motorist coverage.
Okay. So really quick, so uninsured, so that is just that insurance will hopefully kick in a situation like that.
It will.
Okay, it will kick in. So in addition to everything we just discussed, is there anything in specific that passengers should know ahead of using these rideshare apps?
Well, that's what I was alluding to with the underinsured motorist coverage. The TNC coverage usually does not provide for underinsured motorist coverage. And that, with all policies, is an optional coverage. And so what does that mean? That means if, let's say you have a $1,000 policy, $50,000 per accident, $100,000 per person for liability, you have that in uninsured coverage as well. But underinsured, you have to ask for it and say, I want that. And so what does that mean? That means if you're in the Uber and you get struck by somebody that only has minimum limits and you're catastrophically injured and there's no other coverage, you want to make sure that you have underinsured motorist coverage that will stack on top, because the TNC coverage may not provide it. So you've got to either look to the driver of the Uber or to your own policy. And so I encourage everybody to make sure that you look at your deck page and see that you have UIM, underinsured motorist coverage, in equal amounts to your liability.
Okay, so everybody, UIM.
Everybody should have it.
Okay, and also, is there anything that drivers should know? If they want to drive for these rideshare apps, is there anything that they should be keyed in on?
Well, they probably want to have the UIM as well.
Yeah, of course, of course.
UIM, and there's also the MedPay policy. That's another optional policy that costs like $10 or $20 a year for $1,000 in coverage, and it applies in every situation, whether you're a passenger in a Lyft or you're a passenger in my car, or you're a pedestrian on the street, you get that med pay. And if a lawyer's handling your case, they don't get any of that money. The adverse doesn't get an offset. You just get that money dollar for dollar. So in addition to getting UIM, get MedPay.
Okay, perfect. If you happen to be in a rideshare accident or any other legal issues, legal questions, 843-900000000, Clekis.com is where you can go. Nick, always a pleasure. We're back.
Thanks for having me.
After this.
This has been Legal Perspective with Nick Clekis.